Good morning. Today's reading is going to be out of the ESV. It's going to be Luke chapter 2, verses 4 through 18. Luke chapter 2, verses 4 through 18. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which was called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. And in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And the angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone above them, and they were filled with great fear. And the angel said to them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news and great joy that will be for all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased." When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see the thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that has been told to them concerning the child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them.
Good morning, everyone. Come indeed. That seems to be the claim that Jesus makes. Come. But we see in the English language, indeed seems to be something that is emphatic to do. You should be doing this. It's important to do. But why should we come? I've got this sense that somebody's talking to me, the shepherds might think, but not really. The shepherds knew exactly this was something special from the heavenly host. But why do it? Why come and see a little baby? All babies look the same. I hate to tell you, but most babies look ugly. Now that's from a man's point of view. I've only seen a few babies you say, "That's a cute baby." And then you look at babies and say, "Whoa, you need some time." Okay, no more jokes on this topic. But I want you to get the point that it's centered around a child that can't speak yet. And yet everything's going to hang on this child. And there's even the hope from deity coming down to emphasize that this event may be the most important historical event up to this point. And you need to pay attention. I thought I'd go over a few things. Jeff's got a few lessons that are going to be coming that are going to be really good. And I've tried to make sure I don't get into his lessons very much. But there are several things that over the years, if you've ever played the game, you whisper a sentence to somebody and then they turn and whisper a sentence to them and they turn and whisper a sentence. And then at the end you ask, okay, what is the sentence? And it's never the same thing that started. And it seems that the story of the birth of Christ, things have changed and evolved over the years. It's been cleaned up. and more commercial and more presentable, more acceptable on our terms, maybe. When in reality, back then, I want you to see, and I think Jeff's going to be bringing this out really well, the humanity of Christ, the poorness of Christ. I did. Okay. The poorness of Christ. That he wasn't rich, and yet he's called a king. This is important to see, that there's no horn blowing here, that this man's going to be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he's going to rule the nations. Not the way we thought. He still is King of Kings, but not on the terms that we set forth. Some of the setting the stage for Jeff, and then we're going to get into the why come. The city of Nazareth was not that big a deal of a city. Uh-oh. I can't even mumble now. Thank you. It's a city that was vacant in BC, the latter part of BC, and it was not a big city. It was maybe 10 acres, approximately. It was about 1,100 feet. And so when you left Nazareth and you came down through Galilee and along the rivers and the lakes and so on, you actually were leaving the latitude coming down to Jerusalem. There was approximately 400 people that lived there. Now, why am I going to talk about a few of these things? It's because I want you to see the point that sometimes TV exaggerates some things. And I want you to see again, there was no big trumpeting about the birth of Christ. Most of the people missed it. And so part of the reason is this is a very humble and insignificant town. Nazareth is. The star that guided them cannot be a comet, cannot be a planet, cannot be a sun. Whatever you want to insert in there, that some of the TVs and stories that have been made is not possible. This is something that was sent from deity. It was something special. It led the Magi. And when they went in to talk to Herod, they came out, and then the star shone again. And it said they rejoiced to see the star again. And so whatever it was, the idea from Greek is that it could have been an angel. And it wouldn't be the first time that an angel showed up and was brilliant in his presence. It wouldn't be the first time. It could have just simply been a divine light that was so extraordinary and was easy to follow. But what is, again, important is it set over the very head of Jesus. You cannot put a planet or a comet or whatever you want to put there, and he'll sit exactly right over where he is. And so again, those who have maybe put a twist to some of these things need to understand God is involved in the birth of Christ. That's what makes him the Christ, is that deity set forth something that has never been used before to give them location to those who wanted to worship him. We also have the Magi. It's plural. Pliny, who was one of the elders back in the first into the second century, he felt that the Magi probably came from Medea. Medea is, if you remember Babylon we talked about in the book of Jeremiah, you just go a little bit more east, there's some mountains there, and on the other side is Medea, country of Medea. Or they might have come from Persia also, because of some of the drawings of the 2nd and 3rd century show them more dressed in a Persian type clothing. not possible probably to be three men. These were three important men. They were viewed as maybe magicians. Now, this is not unusual. If you remember in the book of Daniel, and he could not understand his dream, what did he do? He called in what? He called in his magicians. He called in his scholars. He called in his advisors. He called in his astrologers. He called in his diviners. And they were looking to understand what his dream was. So kings used these men as part of their council. And so these three men quite possibly are part of a kingdom, and were very close to the kings of those territories. And for whatever reason we don't know, they found out and were drawn to go see this baby out of absolute respect. They weren't wondering, what is this? They knew what it was. And they prepared themselves by bringing gifts. Gifts that only come from kings. And remember that Mary and Joseph were poor. I would suggest to you that part of the reason they did not have a place to stay was they couldn't pay for it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But anyways, the Magi also, if you're going to carry gold, frankincense, and myrrh, guess what? I think you've got company with you. Because remember Paul talking about the roads and how dangerous they were and times that he was robbed and so on and beaten? You're not going to be carrying things of value and not have an entourage of men with you to protect what you're carrying. And if you're dressed in the way that you've come from a throne of a king, then definitely you've drawn attention to yourself, and you're going to have men that's going to protect that. And so these are just some thoughts to think about. I might call it reasoning thoughts that you think about the birth of Christ. Bethlehem. Well, let me put it this way, first of all. Nazareth was about 88 miles north of Jerusalem, 18 miles west of the Sea of Galilee. Bethlehem is about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. Bethlehem is about 10 acres tops, less than 400 people. This is not, remember in one of the little songs that we sing, O Little Town of Bethlehem? Bethlehem was not very big at all. Think about 10 acres and the whole city fits inside it. So when we talk about all these children being put to death, how many children could be at the age of 2 down to the just born in a town that's less than 10 acres? And so in reasoning, commentators thought it was somewhere between 10 to 30 children were put to death by Herod when he was trying to find the Christ. Not 100 and something or the whole countryside, but a smaller number. Still, you could certainly hear your neighbor's wife crying as she looked at her dead son. And the whole city would have heard everybody mourning and crying and reaching out, grasping for nothing, not knowing what to do because these soldiers came in and killed their children. So it was very important again to see that Bethlehem, it's an insignificant town, except it's called the City of David, basically because of its inheritance and what it came from originally. So these are some of the preparatory type things I wanted to bring out when Jeff gets into his lesson. I want you to also think about it's most likely that Jesus was born in a cave. Now, all the pictures we have today and all the things we celebrate is we put this wood together and we have this stable outside, and it's a pretty little stable, right? But in reality, first of all, the idea of an inn, coming into a city like David, Bethlehem, they probably don't have any inns. You can't make money on a town that is so small and think you're going to have an inn. The Greek word used there does not necessarily mean an inn as what we're thinking of. The idea more is that Joseph was coming back to his ancestors, and that possibly his relatives were filled up with other relatives. And so when there was no room for them, literally, he could not stay with anybody he knew. And so the only thing that's left is, it was not unusual to use a cave to live in or to even raise some of your animals. And that possibly the manger was made out of stone, because wood was expensive and could not be found readily or easily. And so stones were very common in this region. And it would have been easy to build a manger or a food cup, food plate for animals out of stone. So she could have very well laid Jesus in a manger made of stone rather than wood. And these are just some thoughts for you to think about, where over the years maybe it gets changed. I want you to see how insignificant this birth seems to be. It's small. It's a child. He's born in a cave. He's put in a feed spot for the animals. It's not a big deal, is it? And yet it's the most important event that we know of up to that time. Why come? Why come to Christ? What's so important about the birth of a little child? Well, you may say, well, he's deity. There's got to be more than that, folks. Just because deity walks by, does that change your life? There's got to be more why he has come and why we should go. When you look at Luke chapter 2, verses 13 through 14, we see the smallness of the shepherds come. Shepherds were probably the first grade job that if you didn't have a job, you went to be a shepherd. That was your first entrance job. It was not a big deal. It didn't have a lot of honor. And yet, God shows up through the angels and proclaims to them, come to Bethlehem. Tells them the story that Bob had just read in Luke chapter 2. And the shepherds don't question, because they recognize that this angel is something from deity, is extraordinary. And that grabbed their attention, that I better listen to what this person has to say. And so they leave their herd in the night, and they go. And they also find this place. But what do? They were told what they were going to see. And when they see it, did the shepherds just stand there in awe and say, well, that was quite a ride. That's like going to Disney World. We had a blast. No, that's not what they said. In verses 13 and 14, it says they worshiped. There was peace that was going to be given, and there was content. And I'm trying to bring to you that this is what our purpose is in life, folks. Worship, peace, content. Content with God, content with us. Peace with God, peace with us. Worship Him. They didn't come to worship Mary. Did you notice that? They came to worship a little child. That's extraordinary. They knew something that everybody else didn't know because of an angel. We have similar moments of greatness, and when worship pops up, or praise, or glorifying. We have one in Matthew 21 and 9. When Jesus enters Jerusalem in that last week before he's going to be crucified. And the people are doing what? Laying branches down and shouting Hosanna. And they're laying down their cloaks as he, riding a donkey, goes into town. That's one moment where they offer worship to Jesus himself. Also in Matthew 21, verse 16, children start to praise Jesus because Jesus was healing so many people. You can't ignore that he healed these people. And the children were praising God. And so it's not a first, and it won't be the last time that Jesus will be praised by individuals who are compelled by the obvious events that are before them. And the shepherds were compelled to worship Jesus when they saw these events take place. The next thing we see in Luke chapter 2 is these shepherds shared the gospel. These are some of the first gospel moments. The good news of what they just heard and seen is what the scriptures say. What they have just heard and seen. They shared their experience of coming in contact with deity. We find that in verses 17 and 18. I know that you feel that you cannot come in contact with God, but just be patient. For some, that's not going to be good. For others, it will be peace and content. You want to be ready to come in contact with God. These shepherds were prepping themselves. They didn't ignore. They didn't go, no big deal, and go back to their herds because their money was worth more than that little child. They worshiped the little child. What do you worship today? Why do you struggle with worship? Why is it you don't worship every Sunday? Sundays were set up by deity to worship deity. In our household, when we grew up and when the way Karen and I raised our children, worship was expected on Sundays. It was expected. And I'm talking about organized, intentional singing, giving, praying with a group of believers. I'm talking about that. It was not something we wrestled with. It was a way of life. Why would it not be your way of life? Why? What does the world have to offer you? These shepherds dropped their watching of their sheep and went to see this little child. Are you not willing to give up anything to go worship? Let me make it simple. Some people like to sleep in on Sundays. It's my only day I can sleep in. Wow. I can hear the excuses on Judgment Day. Jesus paints a picture in Matthew 25 of a lot of excuses. I thought, I didn't see. I don't want that to happen to us. I want us to see that worship is natural for a Christian. And if it's not, then examine yourself. Because as the lesson was this morning in class, we only find peace in God. This world cannot give you what you're searching for. But God can give it to you even when you're poor or in bad health or rich. It doesn't matter the circumstance. God can give you peace and content because of this little baby. We also find of their sharing, I find this interesting. When you go to the next chapter, whether it's Matthew chapter 3 or Luke chapter 3, verse 7, we have the Pharisees and the scribes come to John the Baptist. And John uses this phrase in both of them. Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Now this is the last point that I'm trying to make. Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? What was the purpose of this baby coming? He came to free us from God's wrath. Folks, we've talked about this before in a public way. Why would God's wrath be on Judgment Day? And I've talked to you about if somebody was to go after my little my little son, handicapped, and was abusive and physically abusive, what do you think I would feel? You think Bruce is going to stand there like this and do nothing? Do you think the people that have spit on the cross of Christ will not be held accountable for how they have treated Jesus all their life and would not worship anybody and did their own thing? Can you see the wrath of God boiling and boiling, and then you step up to him and Jesus says, I know you. Father, I know them. They're part of the church. And then you get, as he says to the man with the 5 talents, and doubled, and the man who also doubled his. Welcome into my bosom. Would you like to hear that? Is that not the worship that you should be looking forward to? You know, I buy a car, I buy a tractor, I buy a combine, bought a used combine, looks brand new. And I sit in that thing and boy, that's great. You want to see my other combine? When I bought that 28 years ago, it looked brand new. And I sat in that and I said, boy, that sure is great. Do you know what it looks like now? The mice have eaten all the wires at the top. They've eaten all the inside covering of the whole upholstery and so on. And it looks pretty worn down. And I'm not so drawn to that old one. Now I'm drawn to the new one. It's not that way, folks. It's not that way with God. Things are always new. And yet the best still is to come. And so worship is a privilege. It's a privilege that you choose to take advantage of. And he came to give you worship. He instructs us how to worship him. He instructs us how he accepts how we worship him. You don't have to make up anything. You just have to obey. And then he gives you peace and content because you did exactly what he said. And you don't have to worry, oh, I hope he's happy. When we do what he says, we know. You know, 1 John 2:3 says, we know. That's absolute. We know we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. You don't have to make it up. It's all laid out for you. And so, what is our point to come to Jesus? We come to Jesus to worship, to find peace, to find contentness. We come to him because we are to share the gospel. We are to share what God has done for us. What do you have to say that God has done for you? Do you have a story? Do you not know what God has done for you? I know we don't fully understand everything. I don't understand everything. But I can look back and see the hand of God in my life over and over and over. I didn't plan for it. It comes into my life. It becomes a blessing. Or he veers me off in another direction. And it was the best thing. And sometimes I get hurt on some things. It was the best thing I see looking back. But folks, on Judgment Day, I think it all becomes clear. And the baby Jesus becomes absolutely clear. I needed him. I had to have him as my Savior. And he was worth my time. The last thing is, who warned you of the wrath to come? Folks, it's not done. He was born. He grew up. He sacrificed himself for us. He has taught us. He died for us, but he raised from the dead to prove I'm God. You can't do this. You can't hold me back. I am the most powerful, and I am willing to bend over and share this with you and make you a part of my family. Now, folks, that's worth worshiping. Jesus is worth our time. It's worth the gospel. It's good news. It's worth the peace as he's going to offer us. and being content in my whole life. When I can't make things happen and things break down, I can go, I won't be here for long. Folks, I'm 68 years old. I can't even brag who I can beat in basketball anymore. I'm getting older. My days are numbered, and I'm starting to know it. And so are yours. So take advantage. When Sunday comes, it's time to worship. And when you walk out that door, as I feel, I was just at a vacation. This is my best time of the week. And I get to go back and I think about the lessons, and I think about some songs we've sang, and maybe some things that some of the brothers and sisters have said to me after class, and we talked about some topics and so on. Or maybe somebody has a need, and we get the opportunity to try and help somebody on something. Folks, that's a good life. It's a great life. And this world has nothing more to offer and can't beat it. I want you to consider seriously and deeply how important your soul is to God. And you need to do something about it if you haven't done it yet. Because he's waiting for you. He knows your name. He knows you personally. But he is not going to force himself on you. He sent a child. Will you draw to the child? The question is up to you to answer. And if we can help in any way bring you salvation, please come forward and let it be known as we stand and sing.